Today we're going to be talking about whether or not you should buy the game Space Engineers. Um, it is, for anyone who doesn't know, a sandbox game with a voxel engine, and essentially you can build spaceships or other machinery either on a planet or in space itself. It is an early access game, and it has been in development since 2013. Um, and this is a very opportune time to talk about this topic because the last update for the game was on the 8th of March. And now, before that, they were updating weekly with minor updates and then major updates. But then they changed to a new system where they're only going to release major updates when they actually have something to update. And then so that means that the 8th of March was the last update, and that's almost 2 months ago. The reason, I guess, is because those weekly updates, I mean, they probably caused more problems than they solved. I mean, all the fixes they said they fixed, a lot of people reported that they didn't actually work. People would report that every week their game would get broken or worse. It would make keeping mods up to date difficult, that kind of thing. So now they're only going to update basically every time they have a major update, they'll release that when it's ready, and then they'll do a couple of hot fixes, and then we'll be waiting for the next major update after that. They talked about it in a Q&A, which caused, I guess, a fair amount of confusion because people took away from it, that is, some people took away from it, that they are just going to abandon the game and start working on like I don't know, a Space Engineers 2 game or something. That's not the sense I got. At least I didn't get the sense they were trying to communicate that point. I think they were just trying to say that they're going to stabilize this game. They're going to add whatever new features they need to sort of shore it up. And then they'll move on to like a 2.0 version, which either could be the same product or another game entirely. I don't know. That wasn't exactly clear. But I think when they're done with this particular product, it is going to look fairly similar to what we have, but essentially stable and maybe with a couple of extra things so that there's a bit more to play around with. And that is one of the biggest problems with this game. Is not necessarily even the development, but the communication from the developers is pretty bad. And so, that's one of the things, like in the comments, because we haven't had an update for a while, people do believe that the game has been abandoned, and it's hard to defend the company and say, look, they're working on this, so you don't have to worry about it, because we don't know what they're working on. We have no clue whatsoever what they're doing, and I think those comments are unfair that say the game has been abandoned, but at the same time it's hard to point to something and say, no, they're working on this, when we have no idea what they're working on. They don't communicate. So if you're buying an early access title like this and you want to make sure that it is going to be developed, that it's not just going to be abandoned, that they have plans, that they kind of know what they're doing. I mean, you don't know what they're doing at all, so you don't have that assurance. And another thing you'd want to consider is they are in an optimization phase, so they're not adding new features right now. They're trying to stabilize it, optimize it, that kind of stuff, which is a good thing, because I mean, like, what do you want? A very buggy, broken game with lots of features and content, or do you want a game that actually works, and then with those features and content added later? And that's been one of the complaints, that they're optimizing. That's been something some people in the community have complained about. They're like, no, we want new features now. To be honest, that's a bad complaint. You don't want new features now. You want the game to actually work. Then you can think about new features, and the game can be incredibly buggy, especially on multiplayer. It can be very buggy. And what people don't always understand is this is an in-development game, so you do have to consider that it's not going to work the same as a finished game. Early access is not equate finished. You do have to understand that there are going to be those problems. Even as they continue to work on it, there are going to be those problems, and you have to expect that until it's actually finished. And then that's when you would have the ability to expect it to work. I mean, not perfectly per se, because no game or software or anything works perfectly, but pretty close to it. So whether or not you should buy it probably depends on a couple of things. So one thing, really to keep in mind is on Steam, as far as I know, there's not really any safeguards to ensure that they actually finish it or finish it the way you want it to, way you want them to. So, do you trust the devs to keep their word? And I think, to come to a conclusion that way, you have to look at what else that they've done. So, one major red flag is Minor Wars 2081. If you look on the Steam page, it has a rating of 30%. So it's mostly negative. People are not too thrilled about that game, and a lot of the complaints are that it's unfinished and unpolished. So, and that game, as far as I can tell, is done. They're not working on it anymore. So that's a red flag. That's something to keep in the back of your mind. Also, in early access, they have, started the other game, Medieval Engineers, and they also started Good AI. So Good AI, I have no idea what they're doing. Like, I can't point to anything that Good AI has produced. Now, that said, I'm not following Good AI because I don't really care about that, but starting those two projects while they're working on this project, a little over ambitious, especially when you consider how ambitious Space Engineers is to begin with, especially for an indie team. Medieval Engineers at least is still being updated with weekly updates, so that at least is a positive. The other thing I would mention is they did do deluxe editions for Space and Medieval Engineers, which is kind of, not the greatest, especially because the stuff they put in the deluxe editions probably could have been included for free in the game as an update, just to sort of say thanks for buying it in early access. But and a lot of people weren't happy with the skins they did. That they even out of the skin system, when they were selling some. I don't care too much about that, but if that's a concern to you, then that's something to think about, because they did, for a limited time, they were selling some of the skins you could buy via microtransactions. Although I think they were pricey enough that you might not even call them microtransactions, you might just call them regular transactions. So you have to think about, do you trust the devs? I think if you look at Space Engineers in a vacuum, or else, that is, if you consider everything else to be background noise, I think the development for Space Engineers has been pretty good. Again, considering how ambitious of a project it is for an indie team like Keen Software House. I think the development is solid. I think at least up to this point. So if that trend continues, I think yes. So I mean, you keep those red flags in the back of your head, but ultimately, I think they can be trusted to at least stabilize the game and get it to that point. I don't think it's going to become the perfect game, or the game necessarily that a lot of people would want it to be, but I think it will at least get stabilized, or at least I think there's a good chance of that. But I mean, just do a little research, find out if you trust them or not, and also even think to yourself, like, do you need to play this game right now? Because if not, or if there's some other similar game you'd rather play instead. You could just hit follow on the Steam store page and just watch the development and then play it later, right? Like, if you absolutely don't need to play this game now, then, wait till it's further in development and actually stabilizes, and that you might be better off for that. I'd also think about, do you like the game the way it is right now? Like, if you watch some gameplay footage, do you like the way it is right now? Because, even if they do successfully do all the optimization and fixes and make pistons and rotors work properly and that kind of stuff, because just spoiler alert, pistons and rotors don't always work the way they should and sometimes explode. But I think about, do you like the way the game it is right now? Because it's not necessarily going to look very different when it's finished. It should end up being very similar to this current stage, except, like I say, more stable. So that's something to consider as well. And then I think a lot of the frustration in the community is because they want more to do, like more survival elements, more NPC interaction, more trading. That might come in the future, but for now, it's just the only real thing to do is build ships. So, think about, are you more into building a ship? There are, different scenarios you might be able to use them in, but ultimately, the bulk of the game is building. So do you want sort of a purely building game with some minor / major hiccups? Major hiccups being the fact that like pistons explode, and also if you build too big, it'll really slow down. But if you want a building game, then this is absolutely a good one. If you want something more, then again, like try to hold off is what I would say about that. And then also, like, do you want to be involved in the development? Because if you do, then yeah, buy the game. If you kind of just want to wait for a finished product, then maybe not. So I think for some people, I would end this with a yes. Like if you're looking at the gameplay footage and you like the way it looks now, and you want to help make it better, and you're okay with just building ships, yes. I think for most people, though, it might be worth following and buying in the future. Buying once they've, at least waiting for the next major update, seeing what they do with that, and then that should give you a good indication of how the development is going to go, and how not just trustworthy, but how capable they're going to be of bringing this project to a good conclusion. We are 4 months into 2018, and that's my thoughts on Space Engineers.